It is a minute or so after 10. You ready?
Yes.
Oh, all right. All right. I think we're ready to go. This is Monday, November 23rd, 2020. It is a meeting of the Topeka City Council Social Service Grants Committee. Looks like we have a pretty full house online and three of us here in the Law Enforcement Center. Our subject today is it's really going to be a work session, I think, to talk about the applications and details of those for next year's social service grant application process. We will see how far we can get. I'm guessing that we may get pretty well through at least what we think will work, and may need to have a short meeting or review to finalize what this document's going to look like. We also have some other issues that we've gone through that in a package we'll need to settle before we wrap up our work. So we'll see how far we get today and start immediately. What we did with the agenda was to set the things that we've already worked on the second half of the agenda, so we could really focus on the application and scoring process, which is where we left off and may take us some time. We don't have yet a consensus or any tentative approval on that yet. We needed to do some work. And we got just this morning from Brett Martin at United Way, thank you, a copy of their application form. So it may take people a little time to have a peek at that and do some toggling. With that, let's do a call to order of this meeting and get a roll call of the committee members. Again, I'm Karen Hiller from District 1, Chair of the committee. If you would self-introduce.
Mike Padilla from District 5.
Christina Valdivia Alcala from District 2, and forgive the traffic behind me.
Oh, we can't hear it yet. Okay.
I meant the human traffic.
Oh.
Say hi to John for me. Yes?
Hi, John. We all say hi. We want to know what he's cooking. Okay. I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes from the October 29th meeting.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Any corrections, additions? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Minutes are approved. Okay, moving on to discussion for the 2022 cycle. What we have on that item is outcomes, process, applications, and scoring recommendations. So, and I can't remember exactly, probably I said to put process on, I'm not sure what that means exactly, but we'll blow through it. Outcomes. We have a mission statement on our funding priority sheet. We have had one for years. Brett suggested that we should be more specific about what outcomes we were expecting, which we can talk about, but we need to be. But at this point, the top level of our priority sheet has stubbed in adding the words outcomes based. So right now, it says our mission statement would be outcomes based, quality, cost effective social services to handle our vulnerable citizens with care, minimize victimization and crime, minimize turnover in neighborhoods, and optimize success. Those are pretty broadly stated, but then we do have 6 funding areas under those. And if you read through those areas, they do tie into one or more of those broad statements. When Brett said us, I'm going to just try and frame it anyway for some conversation. When Brett sent us the United Way materials, it became a little clearer to me, I guess, why, Brett, you suggested that, in that United Way has chosen to limit what they fund and to be pretty specific and set the outcomes themselves. And we have they sent us along what they call their GRF indicators with outputs and outcomes on them. Back to what we've had in the past, what I recalled was that the committee, when this process was established, wanted to clarify what areas of service they would fund, what target populations they would provide services for, and chose to set that overall, what they called a mission statement at the time, but not to be specific about exactly, they wanted the applicants themselves to identify the outcomes that their particular program was gearing toward. And now that I see United Way's application, they don't ask people to identify the outcomes because they're preset. So to get started today, I think what we need to decide is whether the system that we have right now, which overall states some parameters and some overall, some of those are outcomes, but they're generally parameter categories. If that's satisfactory still for what we're about, or if we want to take some steps farther. Councilwoman.
Thank you, Chair. This may be nothing, but the way that the initial mission statement sentence ends, it's like it's incomplete to me. I don't know. Minimize turnover, this is the last part of the sentence, minimize turnover in neighborhoods and optimize success. So is that just referencing success for all of the below, or should there be more on that sentence? Should there be an additional sentence?
I think the way that it's set up, and we can have some staff input on this as well, is that it's a fill in the blank. The outcomes model is that there needs to be a success. You need to have a need that you've identified, and you have to have an overarching goal as well as perhaps some subsidiary goals of why you're doing this in the first place. What are we trying to accomplish? So that the way that it's been set up so far is that the applicant needs to decide what success looks like in that outcomes description section. So it wouldn't be the same for each grant, and it wouldn't maybe be the same for each grant for senior citizens or for neighborhood and independent living for persons with severe and persistent mental illness. Those are a couple of our categories. But the way it was set up in the past was that the sort of a test, I'm sure, to make sure that the agencies understood outcomes and we're not just doing programs, not just doing outputs, not just saying we had X number of people through and we did X number of things, but that they were able to frame why they were doing it and tie the program to that. And then demonstrate success in the program, but obviously it's built into success for the people, for the participants. So they are not super specific, not like the ones on the GRF indicators that United Way has established itself for the entities that it funds. Brett, did the reviewers really struggle with the fact that that has not come up before, but did they struggle with the fact that we've asked our applicants to define their outcomes themselves?
Thank you, Chair. There was, as I mentioned in the last meeting, there was a sense among reviewers that they were unable to give a score to the quality of the outcome. That is, they had no place on their review sheet or on their score sheet to give a score as to whether or not a program had put forth a strong outcome or a moderate outcome, or a weak outcome, if you were to use those three for example. And so I think that was part of what spurred the conversation. I think the other part that that caused us to ask you about this was for us to be able to have a sense of what exactly these dollars are accomplishing across the community. And if in fact these are simply program defined, it is rather difficult to report to, at least in my estimation, to the council, to city staff, and to the larger Topeka community what these dollars have accomplished. So we have many of our partners who do define some of those outcomes, and we work to align those with some of them in our GRF, the Global Results Framework. United Way Worldwide has put together sort of for the larger United Way network. These for us were an example for you all to take a look at and to think about how we might potentially, in a future time, perhaps convene the agencies to take a look at some outcomes that would be broad-based but specific enough to measure impact across the city.
Help me a little bit. Our scoring sheet, since day one on this program, I think, has actually assigned a lot of points to outcomes. And one of the sections is 10 points. This is out of 100 for those who don't have the scale with them. Outcomes are clear and related to identified needs. 10 points if they're described in detail and are achievable. 8 if they're general or vague. 5 if they're not described in detail, and 0 if they're unclear, which was intended to allow the reviewers to score. Now, if the reviewers aren't comfortable with outcomes and are used to somebody else identifying the outcomes, that could be a difference, I suppose. Corey's on, but we always recruited reviewers that were very familiar with that model. Then there's a separate one for outputs, which then separates outputs from outcomes and has the same 10 points of measures. There's 5 points on how you're going to how well you set up your measuring system, and then there's 20 points on having achieved them. So it's really heavy on whether you've described it as well as how you did the last time around.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think those questions are important. I think the step further that our reviewers were taking a look at, and all of them have been scoring grants for years that have had outcomes, there was something for them that was missing beyond being able to describe them, making sure that they were clear, and whether or not they were achievable, particularly when they were looking at such a broad and sort of sweeping range of programs. So for example, you could have an applicant that very clearly articulated goals. They are in fact achievable, and they met all of those criteria, but they would still in some ways be a weak outcome. I'll give you an example of what this might look like, not drawing from any of our applications, but giving you a sense of what this might look like. You could have, for example, a program that puts forward outcomes that says, after receiving an invitation, X percentage of clients will come to our office. And they are very clear about how that is going to be measured. They put 80% on there or 70% on there and explain how that's going to be achievable. And then they describe it in any number of other ways. There might be then a peer program. So that program I just explained could very well achieve 10 points on that because they were clear it was achievable, and they met the other requirements. You may, however, have another application that comes in that goes far beyond people simply coming into the office, that would say, our clients will not only come into the office, but will also receive our services and achieve 70% success based on some other higher level performance indicator. And they are clear in that. They put something that's measurable and achievable forward, but they would potentially receive the same amount of points as another program that simply said, we're going to just make sure people come in the door.
But coming in the door is an activity. It is not an outcome ever. And because, I mean, unless you've stated, you know, the need, and the need is that for somehow there is a need in the community or for some cohort of individuals that they need to walk into your office because it's going to change their life.
But you could have a program that would say that people need to receive our services. And so for them, coming into the office would receive services, but they haven't gone to any type of performance indicator. They've simply moved at this very low level outcome and not really moved to any kind of change in terms of a client population or even on an individual level. So, you know, when you start thinking about this, when you think about people putting forward their services or their products, whatever that might be, a higher level outcome would measure some change within that population. And because there isn't necessarily a question that allows a reviewer to score the quality of that outcome, you could have two programs that come forward who are clear, they're measurable, they're achievable, but there really is a gap between what one program is measuring and striving for and what another program is measuring and striving for. I guess what I'm saying is that it has to do with the degree to which you're measuring change among those people you're serving.
Yeah, I'm troubled a little bit by the discussion because some of the examples are simply activities or might be outputs, but there is no outcome unless it addresses a need and it has a behavioral, generally a measurable goal that's either a fact, some situation or of safety, for instance, going from being an unsafe situation to being in a safe situation, or even a sustained safe situation. But just walking in the door for counseling is an activity. Getting counseling is an activity. You haven't accomplished your outcome until you're in a safe place, and perhaps a corresponding outcome of feeling more confident about going out in public again or something like that. An outcome, and that's why we had the question in there. But if we're, and I hear you still that maybe we've never gone back, or I'm not aware that the committee along the time has gone back and taken what the outcomes were, the proposed, the stated outcomes that got whatever points they got, and said, okay, what are we learning about what our senior programs, for instance, are setting as goals for our seniors and how they're measuring it. I'm not aware that any of the committees have gone back on that. We didn't want to be, as I was on the early committees, I haven't always been on in between. We didn't want to be prescriptive about exactly what what need they were addressing with the program, and therefore what outcome they set. but we certainly wanted to make sure that they all were outcomes-based, which is rather than just an activity. So just because you had so many people show up at your center doesn't say anything. That's an output maybe, but it's not an outcome. And so we've got to know what we're trying to do for folks. Shouldn't have picked on senior centers. I guess we've already talked about them, put them on the table quite a bit, but are we trying to have them be physically healthy, mentally and emotionally healthy, be confident that they've got good nutrition, that they're able to get to that they're getting medical care, those kinds of things. So then your activity should only be built toward achieving those outcomes, not just having a head count walking in the door, whether it's to the United Way office or to and so on. Does it make sense?
Yes, absolutely. And I would say that we have, based on, full disclosure here, I did not read the applications that came through. My team did, because I served as the neutral facilitator. So in order for me to be a neutral facilitator of the grant review process with those reviewers when they were walking through, I did not read the applications. Based on the conversations with my team, and my team did read those in order to be able to provide technical assistance and others, and based on what the reviewers suggested, there was a pretty broad set of outcomes, and there were some outcomes from some programs that were much stronger than others. And so I think perhaps we would all benefit from having some conversation related to these outcomes, maybe even having programs share those outcomes in some sort of forum, being able to look at the degree of those outcomes and perhaps even have some peer learning among programs to better understand outcomes. We may, for example, have some programs that are delivering the same service and have a pretty significant difference in the outcomes that they're measuring. And while that's certainly appropriate, maybe in a city grant purpose, or for the sake of reporting to the community what impact these dollars are having, maybe there could be one or two agreed upon outcomes among those who provide similar services that could be reported on this grant, so that there is a consistent quality of outcome, but also a more unified voice related to how these dollars are impacting the community.
I'll speak for myself. I think the council has counted on the staff and now our vendor to have recruited. We've been very specifically left out of that process and don't even know who the reviewers are, but have relied on the fact that those reviewers in fact were scoring correctly. I guess if your reviewers were uncomfortable with outcomes, did they just score everybody high? Or, I mean, I didn't hear any feedback from the agencies to speak of that the scoring had changed.
Sure. No, let me be very clear. All of our reviewers are experts in reviewing grants and outcomes. All of them have more than 5 years experience in reviewing grants, some of them much longer, in reviewing grants and taking a look at outcomes. They suggested perhaps a question on the strength of the outcome, or to be able to have programs reporting on some similar types of outcomes that were strong outcomes, rather than just having everyone report on their own outcomes, may be one way to measure the strength of their application. So again, they all understand the difference between an activity They all understand the difference between an output. They all understand an outcome and how you're figuring those percentages and whether or not those are measurable, achievable, and clear. They suggested that some outcomes put forward by programs were weaker than others, and that they had no way to indicate that because the rubric said clear, measurable, achievable, and they met all of those, and yet they were still weaker than some of their peers.
So if we we go to the scoring sheet, and right now you get 10 if they're described in detail and are achievable, 8 if they're general or vague, 5. What your folks were suggesting is that the 10 points is really strong, 8 points is pretty good, but not the best, 6, and a different scoring measure perhaps then?
Perhaps, or maybe just the inclusion of strong, moderate, something like that. Some other language that attests to the quality of the outcome and not just the applicant's ability to describe it, or the applicant's ability to achieve it.
Okay. So it could be strong, moderate, weak.
Something like that.
Something like that.
Chair,
Councilwoman.
so are you talking then about adding a whole different grading mechanism, like below outcomes are clear and related to identified needs, then it goes 10, 8, 5, 0. So you're saying like then maybe adding another component, that would measure whether it was strong, average, or weak with points attached to it?
I'm thinking we could substitute. We do ask elsewhere about people measuring and whether they did a good job with that. Brett? I'm thinking if it might be possible to just substitute. Score it differently than we did before. I mean, there's
Under scoring it differently, but keeping the sentence the same, outcomes are clear and related to identified needs, or changing that whole thing up.
Maybe we need to be, outcomes are strong and measurable, something like that.
To replace that component. Okay, got it. Just want to make sure I'm clear.
No, that's what the committee's for. The best we can with our staff help. Brett, if it said outcomes are strong and measurable, and then we did the 10, 8, 5 with strong, moderate, weak.
Yeah, well, I think I don't have that score sheet in front of me. How many different point values are there?
Well, there's 10 points on your outcomes and your outputs. And so you get 10 points for first describing them well, is the way we did it. But if it was, and the cohorts right now are, or the point scale is 10 points, 8 points, 5 points, and 0. We can do anything in there. The committees along the way have, for the most part, wanted not more than 3 or 4 variables under each, but went ahead and set the scores in place rather than put the committee in the position of having to pick a score themselves.
Yeah, I think you could use, you could perhaps make an addition to those if you wished, in some type of qualitative way, from a Likert scale to say very good, good, acceptable, poor, or something related to that. I think that would be, one way to be able to do that. Although I do recognize Deborah just posted in the chat about how strong is defined, that could be subjective, and she's absolutely right. That there is, when you start looking at qualitative indicators like this, there is perhaps some measure of subjectivity that comes in to that. Although you could argue as well that there's some subjectivity about whether or not something is clear or whether or not something is achievable, for example.
Chair, if I may.
Please.
I'm listening to the conversations and I'm beginning to wonder if we are talking more about how the outcomes are described, because that's what I hear, that strong, medium, weak, whatever, how they're described, or if the desired result is what is being measured as weak or medium or strong. I'm trying to explain myself here is that maybe I do a really good job of describing what the outcomes are for my particular program. And so I get a strong rating. But the service that is being provided or the change that is being made because of those outcomes, is that being measured in comparison to others, or just what I, as the applicant, has put together as the desired results of our activity? I'm getting kind of confused here. Are we focusing more on our description of how we have done our job, or the value of what has been achieved by our work? So are the outcomes measured more about that, or about how well I describe it in my application?
Wouldn't it be both?
Well, yeah, I'm not trying to cut through this stuff, but we've been talking back and forth now for what, 10, 15 minutes about outcomes and everything, but I haven't heard much about the value of those outcomes. If the value of outcomes is our focus, then is that diminished because the applicant hasn't done well in describing that value to the reviewers? Or is it, what are the reviewers looking at? The narrative or the actual result of the work of the applicant? You get what I'm saying?
Yes, on my end, that and that's really, and so maybe I wasn't clear, but I think that's the heart of it, is that yes, a program may be able to articulate, have measurable, have achievable, and may have in fact achieved them in the past, but the question is, what is, to your terminology, what is the value of that outcome, and is it creating some meaningful change in the community? And so again, just very quickly, because I know we've spent a lot of time on this, I think the point that we simply wanted to bring forward is that there may need to be a larger conversation about outcomes among our applicants and among the programs across the community to maybe raise the level of outcomes. Again, I think there's been a lot of great work done, and I think this committee in the past has done a good job of moving toward outcomes-based, but the next step may be to take now a look at the quality and the value of those outcomes and see if we want to try to raise those in a way to better describe the impact of taxpayer dollars and of these federal dollars that are coming in on our residents in order to be able to drive the mission and vision of the work.
Thank you, Brett. I think that's what I was trying, you articulated it better than I, but that's where I was trying to get. But I appreciate that. Thank you.
I agree with that. I agree with that because I think we were talking about the form, then we were talking about the higher ideals that you're aspiring to for what actual change is being implemented, how we share that at a larger meeting somewhere down the road, and with the end result being able to have something really tangible that we can show taxpayers. So it's incremental, I think, different pieces of the same pie.
And just to pull it together, if you've got your score sheets, at least committee members, I mean, the most important part is identifying the need, and that's our first section in the proposals, and that's the first score section, and it's set at 15 points. So your outcome, first you talk about the need, you talk about the population you're wanting to serve and what the problem is, and then you say, this is what we're trying to do, this is the change we're trying to achieve, or what we're sustaining if depending on the folks. And so that outcome needs to be scored based on that need. So we didn't want to be just talking about outcomes kind of out in the ether here. They're all rooted on what the need is that you're planning to serve and the population. I remember years ago when outcomes were new and it was hard for people to wrap their heads around them. The very best training came from the United Way, the Girl Scouts, and the fundamental slogan in that was, so what? So why'd we do this? They had learned from GSUSA training, and it made it so much easier to remember. And so what? What's wrong? What's the problem? Who are we talking about? And then what are we trying to do? And therefore, the activities are kind of step by step, and the outputs are the things that you're doing to get along the way. But the outcome is, did we get there? Did we accomplish it? And Mike, you're right. And Brett, help me if I'm wrong. The way you measure is X% of whatever happens this is the result, and it could be a person measuring against themselves, or it could be a group. Correct?
Yes, absolutely. So some of the programs, for example, measure their outcomes based on client surveys. Some of them based on number and percent of those who came for their services and were connected to other services. Number and percent of those who achieved something, again, and just sort of very kind of basic for their program. But yes, that's the idea, is that it is a number and percent achieved based on that metric or indicator that the program has established.
An example might be where we have one priority category of severe persistent mentally ill. Often those folks are homeless, or they're not in safe and affordable housing. And so the goal was we want to optimize stabilizing the neighborhoods that they're in so that it works for them, and we want them to get in this housing, and we want them to stay in this housing. So then you can measure whether they got there and whether it was decent, but also you measure, a secondary measure is whether they're still there 6 months later and it's still safe and affordable.
Exactly.
And maybe ask them to, and they need to report then. So there's some data that you can look at, but then you can also ask those individuals themselves whether they feel safer, more relaxed, more confident in their life, and the breadth of the world that they're living in because of those changes that the program provided for them. Am I stumbling on anything there, Brett?
No, that's exactly the direction. And then to be able to say, if we, at some point as a community, we're able to have a larger conversation about what some of those more meaningful outcomes would be, then we would be able to go to taxpayers and the council and say, on a broader level, this is what the dollars achieved.
Well, to see if we can loop this around, this is a pretty big subject, and so if for this year, and I'll float this with you, Brett, and the committee members, if we left that mission statement the same, if we continue to have that 15 points for the need statement, change the ratings for outcomes to being strong and measurable, with a strong, moderate, weak, and unclear, I guess, would be the one we have already. Do we leave in the language, rather, it's so on outcomes are strong and measurable, do we leave it in there and related to identified needs? I mean, they should be, right? Okay. Can we, what's your comfort level with that, or are you leaving the outputs the same? Is that, then we've got a plan has been identified to measure outputs and outcomes. So if we tie those together, our priority sheet still lists those a little more general language, and the categories of people we want to reach. Could that work for this year?
Sure. I think for us, we simply wanted to introduce a conversation to be able to look at future pieces and what this might look like as a process improvement moving forward. So yes, I'm certainly the reviewers we recruited, and obviously those in the past, have not been unable to score applications. So this for us was a way to start a conversation about looking at these at a qualitative level on a kind of broad community scale. So yes, I think those are all.
They couldn't score, and it was like, but they did. So
no, they did score them.
Okay.
No, they certainly did score them, and they just suggested as a process improvement,
Okay.
this is something to think about.
So to kind of, I hadn't realized we would almost have to toggle amongst our different sheets. This is actually working pretty well, even though it's been a little laborious. Minutes or notes to go with that kind of package of changes is that there was already discussion that you all, United Way, might host getting the agencies together further. So discussing strong outcomes and even shared outcomes could happen there. And then further, perhaps for next year's committee review, actually spending time reviewing what the outcomes were and the measures to kind of educate the committee a little bit more, not only on the process, but what they could share might help us. We're kind of down the line at this point for this year, but if it was done early on in the review process.
Yes, and we have begun as part of our process. We have been working with a cohort of our partners already in looking at this, and we'll be expanding that. So, and that includes a whole host of folks who are on the call today, but it would certainly be something that we could cast our net broadly across the community and talk about those.
Well, what I'm thinking is we could actually, we need to approve the calendar before we get done too, and so we could actually recommend that there be a session sort of on the timing where we did the senior citizen services review this year, that we would put in the calendar for next year's team a review of outcomes, you know, post allocation and before the process started again. Would you think that would help? I'm seeing so. Councilwoman Valdivia Avila nodding.
Chair, if
Yes, I do.
Chair?
Yes, please.
To follow up a little bit on what Brett said, I like what I'm hearing from him, that I think for me, the outcomes is how it impacts this community. I mean, we can describe a lot of the details of the work and how many were served and how many services were given to citizens. But, and I suspect that the reviewers take that in consideration, that the outcomes for me have to impact the community. It can't just be, I'm going to say, an effort by an organization, but of all of our organizations to coordinate and how it impacts our community as a whole and how we have addressed identified needs as a whole and how we have changed the environment of our community as a whole with all of the services that are being provided by the different organizations. For me, it has to mean an impact that we, not as a governing body, but as citizens who live here, can see a change in our community because of the things these organizations are doing in a coordinated way, all finding their niche to help a community, citizens that are being underserved or falling through the cracks or whatever. So for me, I like the idea of having a real conversation about how all of these mesh together in impacting the well-being of this community as a whole, not in any individual groups, seniors or medical needs, everything put together as a community that makes this the best place that you want to come to and live in, because it is such an organized, coordinated effort by all of these organizations to provide services where they can and where their expertise lies. So for me, I like kind of what I do like what Brett's saying about a larger conversation about the outcomes and how they impact this community. So that's just my comments. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And so I've penciled a note on the calendar in terms of the committee reviewing that again, as well as Brett has a note about the agencies. Councilman Padilla, I would just ask you further, are you, with those comments, wanting to spend some time to develop some, as a committee, to recommend to the council some more specific outcomes this year, or are we at a good stopping place for this year? Any answers okay?
I think that we're at a good stopping place for this year, since there's not much of this year left. But I do think it's important as we move forward, whoever serves on the committee in the following year, I think it will be beneficial. This is my second year on this committee, and I have seen some changes. I think many of them are positive. I've learned a lot. And I think that some consistency of committee membership helps with that. And I'm not volunteering for next year. I'm just saying.
I thought you were.
You know, it's important to see people get the opportunity to learn, because I know when I came in, it was an overview more than anything. And I think right now I feel much more informed about the services that are being provided and how it affects segments of the community, but in a whole way, so that we're doing it in a way to impact the overall well-being of the community. And so I think we're good for now, but I do think Brett's suggestion that we sit down and have a conversation about that. I think maybe he can give me a little more insight when the reviewers look at this. Do they have conversations about that? How these, all of these combined organizations impact our community, and is there, I guess, a common goal by everybody to reach a level of service and well-being in our community that we all feel like we're filling the gap where we can?
Yes, I don't know that the reviewers necessarily had that conversation. They were saying that that it was clear that you could sort of see impact across, but that if we were able to have potentially more shared outcomes, there might be a way to see that on a larger sort of community level. And that was kind of part of our process review that we did at the end with them.
Okay, let's leave that one there, and I guess Liz is online, but we've got one change then to the score sheet, basically affirming what we've got at the top of the priority sheet and plugged in a suggestion for the calendar, all regarding outcomes. Let's go on into the application, and Brett took the time to give us a fairly marked up version of the application for us to consider from questions or that the reviewers had or the staff had. And this was a stubbed in sample that's got red comments in it. Helps us as a committee understand exactly how that flows.
Chair, is this the one that's 15 pages long?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Brett, do you want to sort of walk us through your comments? If I'm correct, there's kind of two tracks to this. One is just the questions and so on and how they work, maybe why they're there, and then a desire that you said last time to perhaps sync up the order of the questions in the application with the scoring sheet?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and I'm happy to lead through here. I'll actually have Joyce Kotzer, who is our EC Impact guru and who builds a lot of pieces for us, sort of walk through this with us as well.
Okay.
So Joyce, do you have that pulled up?
I'm getting there. Just a second here. Are we starting with just the blank application itself?
Yeah, so the 2021 blank application.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah, so as we walked through this, both Joyce and Juliet took a look at this from a technical perspective, just to take a look at some things that may in fact provide some consistency and maybe make this a little easier on applicants as well. So in the first part under agency director information, Joyce, the comment there, auto-filled from the agency record and EC Impact, so just having that done automatically and not having people re-enter. Is that the sense there?
Are you asking us if it's okay, or is that what?
No, I'm asking Joyce if that's
Yeah.
the sense there.
Well,
Okay.
that's currently the way it was set up. I was just giving information as to where that came from.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, very good. On the primary contact, then the same way, that one all being auto-filled, and that all being auto-filled there on primary contact, and then also from the mission. On the history and capacity, and this is something that we've had conversations on internally as well at United Way, we do ask our programs questions very similar to this, and it is great information, but it is not scored anywhere. And so just the question for the committee would be on the history and capacity piece, particularly on questions about how long has your organization been in existence, and being able to describe general pieces around the agency, as whether or not perhaps some of this can be auto-filled, because how long your organization has been in existence, most of them put the date that they began, and that's not something that changes. And the essence of an organization typically doesn't change over time. And so the question would be, we have programs put this in every year, but it's not scored. And so just something for the committee to consider on that. How does your organization collect and make use of client feedback regarding programs and services? This is the one part of this that is potentially scored in the capacity section under question 3. But again, for the most part, the rest of it not scored in the application.
When it's, I don't recall this conversation, but along the way, but there could be questions that you ask that give you the reviewers framework for the organization when they are scoring things, sections that technically they do score. Yes or no? Like this is asking for the training and the, I mean, the client feedback is part of your often your outcomes measures. So it
Yes,
ties to measuring outcomes, but the years of experience of the organization and the staff in the proposed area, maybe just an affirmation or, you know what?
Yeah, like I said, it's great information, and it may form, you know, an opinion on the overall application. It's not bad, but it's just, I was just pointing out everything and trying to point out also maybe there's some missing questions. Maybe there's something else that should be added that maybe looking through this might help form that.
Okay. Thanks.
Moving down to the application under board control, board composition is scored in the capacity piece under question number 4. So we're on page 3 now. The question below, has the program had an internal evaluation or conversation with others such as funders or stakeholders to assess cost effectiveness and or whether the program needs to be changed to meet the current needs of the community? They do score this question in capacity question number 5. There was a suggestion that this needs to be reviewed as to how our reviewers would know about past grant effectiveness and whether they completed paperwork accurately and on time, or whether this should be removed from the scoring sheet. And so related to this, there was a question, this is a question that shows up on the score sheet for the reviewers, but the reviewers don't necessarily review this exactly. And so a sense about maybe this needs to be auto-filled by the organization who is carrying out, in this case, the vendor, or before the city of Topeka. Joyce, is that right?
Yes.
I have a question.
Councilwoman.
Okay, so I heard what you said, but for my clarification then, when we're looking at page 3, board composition, and it says scored in capacity already on question number 4, and then a score question in capacity 5 needs to be reviewed. So on this particular page, is what you're saying that these may be repetitive and not even need to be in there, or just save them time and just have it auto-filled?
Joyce?
Well, no, the autofill he's talking about is because they, our reviewers don't have this information about whether they reported on time, whether they were, you know, how their reports came in. So removing it from their rubric, they didn't know how to score it because they didn't have any information. So whether we go ahead, or whoever the vendor is, or you as a city would report on that, and then that just roll into their rubric and already have the score in there for them, is what we're saying.
I remember when this got put in, and it had to do with agencies whose programs that they were proposing that we fund had been challenged by other sources to combine programs, to do some changes, and they were not disclosed to us in the applications. And it wasn't put in there to score because it, not everybody would even have that incident, for instance, but it was intended to throw up a red flag if there were if the agency was in the process of considering dropping the program that they were asking for, or merging with another agency, or something like that. It was intended for information that then could provoke conversation. And one of the deals with that is that there is language, help me, Corey and others maybe, there's language, I believe, in the application that says that notwithstanding all the scoring, the committee and the council can make whatever decisions they want. That if the scoring all worked fine, but there was a big red flag about that hadn't been disclosed in the application, or B, if it was, and there would be a question about the priority of continuing to fund that program, at least there could be a conversation. That makes sense? And this is in terms of them self-reporting the cost effectiveness. In terms of whether they did past grant management effectively, that gets scored, but it isn't asked in the application. And we talked about that over the last couple of meetings, in that in the past, with the city staff staffing this process, they were the ones that had managed the grants, and so they filled in that. They provided that information. And with what has been tentatively agreed about getting rid of the different categories between new agency to this process and continuing, that was one of the reasons we had the two levels, because they weren't checking past grant performance with a third party if an entity was new. They were just giving them a buy for a year until they had experience with the city. So I thought the way we left it was that to fill out that one, you all would, United Way staff would need to check with the city or a different funder if the program had not been funded by the city, in order to get, with a short list of questions, to get that grant performance. But you're gonna have to check with us as, in effect, a third party anyway. Is that correct, Brad?
Yeah.
Okay. So we don't need to worry about that one
No,
right now? Okay.
no, because we will just make sure that that one is auto-filled. Moving to page 5, and again, some of these are process notes for us. Actually, this one came out as number 6. Okay, at least on mine. Beginning at program information, just under the board composition piece under program information. General data, just important for us in training, to be sure to tell them not to create a new program, but to select from the drop down if they applied, if they have applied previously. If not, then they do select a new program, but we did have some technical issues there. So that's a training piece for us, and just reminding partners about that.
Before we get to that, we did have a disconnect on the board on what was in the application and the scoring. Have we figured out how to resolve that?
I believe it was a difference. I don't know. Joyce, I don't know that we've made that change.
No, we
No.
haven't made, I haven't made any changes, so.
And it was related to board composition and
And a quorum, the issue of the
Yes.
meetings and the quorum.
yes, average percentage of board membership attending meetings in the past 12 months, and then how frequently does your board meet, are the two questions in the application. I don't have the score sheet. Let me pull up the score sheet here.
Score sheet,
I'm looking to see what page this is on.
see, this doesn't ask what a quorum is. And without that, you can't run the math.
Yes, here we go. So, yes, so organization leadership is strong and maintains community-based representation. At least 20% is made up of racial or ethnic minorities, is less than 70% one gender, meets regularly with over 80% attendance. Yeah, so I think that's where the question was what the quorum was and whether or not that 80% attendance was.
It's 80% of the, it's got a quorum 80% of the time. And so this question needs to get changed to tie up with that.
Yes. So
Because
meets
people,
regularly with over, meets, okay, I think I'm confused then in what you mentioned there. Meets regularly with a quorum over 80% of the time?
Councilmember May.
Corey, thank you.
Sure. We did update the score sheet. I think what happened here is it just didn't get correspondingly updated in EC Impact. So I can work with Brett on the side to make sure that that is in there, but it was part of the score sheet. Yeah.
Right, we had it in the score sheet, but then there was a disconnect. So this question that has the average percentage of board members needs to be changed to reflect, I can't think of the phrasing right now, but it has to do with, did you have a quorum 80% of the time?
Yes.
And so, Corey, would that mean that we would be provided, or Brett, an updated copy then?
Yeah, let us
on EC?
rephrase the way that is in the application if you let us do that, and then we'll bring it back to the group for approval.
Okay. Now, okay, Brett, thank you for the little walk back.
Thank you. So get back to the application here. Then continuing on that vein, Joyce, you want to pick up after where it says grant application?
Okay.
The notes there where it says currently set up an EC Impact.
Right. Yeah, in EC Impact, there's different levels, and when I built it and brought it over from the city, I was told not to make any changes, but I think we could have better reporting if we do a little bit of the program type being whether it's emergency services or preventative services, because that's kind of how my understanding is how you guys break it out.
Mm-hmm.
So cleaning this up a little bit would make it less confusing, because a lot of the agencies didn't quite understand. I don't know if they didn't understand what they were applying for. There should have only been 2 choices, but the way it's set up in our system, and because we're running it through our system, it threw in all of ours as well. So something needs to be changed between these 3 areas. I don't even think we need the major one at the top, because that's going to be the same for everyone. So it's just doing a little cleaning up of that and not making it so confusing for our agencies is where I was going with all this.
Okay. So again, that's an internal piece that we can take care of?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm hoping so, yeah.
So all right, you'll figure it out.
Yeah.
I'll figure it out. It's
Okay.
because I wasn't allowed to make really any changes this time because you guys wanted it the exact same. So this is one little area that I would like to really work on this next time to make it much easier for the applicants to complete and put the right information in. And some of that's got to do with training as well.
Taking a look then, the next couple are scored in question 1 and question 4. Describe the process you utilize to verify income for your clients, not addressed on the score sheet, just something to keep in mind. what donated goods or volunteer services do you receive that add value? Potentially addressed in capacity question number 1. So just some pieces to consider there. Again, some of these reflections, not necessarily suggestions. Joyce, on the budget, do you want to talk about that on page 7?
Yeah, currently in the budget line, well, on this one, there's 2 different sections. This one is like within this narrative area, and I just didn't know whether it was like necessary that we had to do it in the budget and through here. It's like answering it twice almost. So, and then in the budget itself, it broke out the 2 different type of granting, but our agencies don't know where the money's coming from. So in the budget form, you're asking them to decide where their money's coming from. It should just be City of Topeka grant money. And you guys as a staff, I mean, that shouldn't be brought to the applicant to divide that out. So that was kind of both of the budget issues in one area. I mean, but I wasn't real sure about this question with funding history and requests and whether it needs to be broke out this way here. The question needs to be, and that way it rolls into the budget for them, what they're requesting this year.
Let's check with Corey. I always felt like it was kind of an oddball thing, just kind of plugged out there in the beginning via myself, but is there a reason, Corey, to have them in twice?
Honestly, this part of the application predates me, and I agree it doesn't need to be separated out because we make the decision on who gets the CDBG funds based off of the emergency aid application.
And the little box that was always on the front page or whatever it was that shows the split doesn't really need to be there twice. Okay.
So.
And I think to that point, that's one of the things we found in going through EC Impact as well, is that Joyce inherited things from previous administrators. And so this is part of it, just taking a look to see if we can't make it a little easier for our applicants moving forward. And that there have also been improvements to EC Impact over the years that make some of this
obsolete.
Yeah, obsolete. The next piece on service areas and outcomes. This is just a conversation that we had related to outcomes here, and just a way to be able to have, again, just a larger conversation about outcomes, and to really be able to see on a large scale, is everyone better off? Or, Karen, to your point earlier, so what on these? And potentially to think about if we are, if the community moves to something like that, it would be able to then have an opportunity to measure programs against one another in terms of their performance. And reviewers would be able to do that, as well, to be able to measure the various programs' performance on a shared set of outcomes.
Are you wanting to try and step into that this year?
Yeah.
Okay.
Again, just something for us to take a look at moving forward. In the budget piece, then on page 11, we just addressed that in terms of City General Fund and the CDBG with Corey. And again, on the budget narrative on page 13, any substantial increase or decrease in your budget, a good question but not scored, just as a reflection. And the collaborations and partnerships were scored. So that was all the notes on the application.
Some things that you pointed out that aren't covered would be, for instance, you indicated that in your United Way process, you do the scoring, but then there are also other considerations that are given, and that our process doesn't allow that to happen. So for instance, comparative, you mentioned the quality of the service. So we ask some of those questions. How do you interview with your clients? What's the quality and experience of your staff? Even what you're suggesting now, how important is that outcome compared to others, perhaps, in terms of the community? Just not sure how you do that on the budget. Something that we haven't been able to score is the budget itself. We haven't scored, and we haven't had a way to score whether it appeared that there might be other sources of funding available for that program. Do you have comments or thoughts about that?
So related to that, I think that's something that frustrates our applicants in a process, because we all want, as grantors, most of the time, grantors want to see a diverse revenue stream supporting a program. They don't want to be the sole source of funding. However, the flip side of that is that if they have a robust and diverse revenue stream, then a reviewer could look at that and say, well, maybe they don't need our money as much. And it's a tough position for organizations and programs, because it can get dicey, because you, particularly when dollars are scarce, you say, well, they have a really robust support system here. If we reduce their dollars by this, they can still make it, or something like that. And those have certainly been conversations in United Way panels in the past, and trying to look at how to allocate dollars effectively in that way. And so I can say that we haven't figured that out. But I do think it's important that organizations value that and work toward that diverse revenue stream. The reviewers on the other side make sure they don't knock them down because they have other dollars coming in to support the program. Because again, if it is about the driving the mission of this work and those pillars that you have identified, then an organization shouldn't be penalized just because they've done a really good job of making sure that they have a robust support system.
Well, and there's a corresponding, I really just wanted to ask you about it, that, sometimes you feel like there are other sources. Sometimes, the more sources you have, the more admin you have. So you can be a little leaner if there are less sources.
Yes, sometimes, but I do think a lot of our programs do a really good job of keeping that admin low, and working hard to make sure that they have applied for the necessary supports they need to drive their work.
You also had mentioned the issue of cost per client when we talked last month. Should we be, in your opinion, looking at something like that as we review this form?
I think for a future year. I think to that point, it can get complicated, particularly when you're investing dollars in, for example, a program, and a good portion of that is going to support the program staff, because the staff are the program. And then to be able to talk further about how those units are measured, as we mentioned before, sometimes they measure it in just contact points with a client. Sometimes they measure it in an actual different service delivered. And so I think it can get difficult. I'm not exactly sure how to do that, but I think just an ongoing conversation about it is valuable.
Okay. You also had, I saw in your application form that you actually asked people what they would do if they didn't get the full funding amount for the program. And something that's come up in our discussions this year was a news to some of us that the city staff in the past, if somebody didn't get 100% of what they asked for, which most of them don't, went ahead and cut down proportionally the number served goals, the various activity goals, which then made it easier to hit the outputs. You'll be in the position of having to either say, no, tell me about whether your program is complete before we would change any output numbers and outcome numbers. Have you thought or talked about those challenges at all?
Haven't been able to get really deep into that. Joyce?
Well, in our grant process, we have a revision process that once they receive the money that they are receiving, then the agency has a chance to come back and adjust its numbers, and it's a part of the process that we do. You guys don't do that in your city of Topeka. You don't have a revision process.
Well, not with the council, not with the committee or the council, but we learned that the staff was doing that. I don't know if everybody knows about it. I don't know how many adjust their numbers from what we approved. I don't know.
Councilmember, if I may.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we've been doing this for quite a number of years where if someone requests $20,000 and they get $10,000, their outcomes might need to change due to the difference in that fund. So we allow all the agencies to, when they get their executed contract for the year, to adjust their outputs and to fit the dollar amount that they receive from the city.
Is it a discussion or is it automatic? Or has it been in the past?
It hasn't really been a discussion. The agencies, you know, I don't think any agency is trying to get over on the process by reducing their outputs just so they can make them. I think they just genuinely make minor changes to it just based off of the new dollar amount. I haven't had any come across that look like they were, I don't know if fraudulent's a good word, but we haven't had any come across like that across our desk from the agency.
And please don't misunderstand me because I'm not talking about being fraudulent, but a lot of times, and again, I'm thinking my own experience, you've got a certain program size, you've got a client base, you've got to do it, and you do it. And if you don't get, and you may have applied for funding from multiple sources and have some funding within your organization that you can shift around based on how your grants come in. And so you might get a reduction from United Way, but you're still going to go ahead and serve 100% of the people that you have in your proposal because you need to, and you figure out how to do it. And so you don't change your numbers. You retain your goals, and that's what I'm used to in running social service programs. But if others, you know, I wasn't familiar with reducing numbers when you were going to run the full program anyway, and so that was what had confused me.
Yeah, for the most part, all of the agencies don't make hardly any modifications to their outputs. We just felt it was right to allow them that opportunity that they did fund it. But
thank you. That clarifies. Okay, so Brett, from your point of view, with what you do at United Way, with the fact that we don't talk about it, you think we're good for this round anyway? Or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
You had a question about some of these certifications?
Certifications. The
Got a little 2-page thing. Apparently, people have to turn in.
let's see on the requested attachments.
Yeah, the requested attachments.
Okay, there we go. Joyce, you want to just explain those pieces there?
Well, I wasn't sure because I'm not sure how the resolution 7580 works. Because if they have to download their resolution certificate, do they still get a certificate if they don't have insurance or if they're not in good standing? Because I don't see why they need to attach 3 separate things. If you've got a resolution certificate, doesn't that mean you're good? But I don't work with that particular certificate, so I don't know how that works. I was just trying to make it easier and not have so much that the agencies have to upload. But if they need all 3, of course, we'll leave them there. But if you're certified, does that cover the other 2? And Corey, I don't know if you can answer that question for me.
Yeah, Joyce, I will honestly, that's another thing I haven't that time. I'll take a look and let's see if we can streamline that and just make it part of each impact, but I need to look at the resolution and ensure that that's allowable.
Okay.
So I'll get back.
Okay, I sure didn't feel qualified to advise on it, so thank you. Does that get us through the form then? Was there anything else lingering, Fred, about the application that, or Councilwoman Valdivia Alcala, that you saw in the United Way one that you thought we should do differently, or Councilman Padilla? All right. With that then, we have the scoring sheets. We have identified a change to make in the scoring sheet already this morning, and we have worked on syncing up the one that was a problem last year on the board attendance. So, Brett, you've also got a marked up EC impact version of the score sheet for us.
Yes, thank you. This is just related to how these particular areas within the score sheet align with the application. And so I think we could, Joyce, if I'm not mistaken here, either have a way to help drive the reviewers to those areas of the application, or maybe put it in order. Is that what you were thinking here?
Yeah, it was basically just lining up. It was my way of taking it so that it's easier for the reviewers, but I had to basically lay it out. And so I was just putting the information in there. It is question 1, and maybe I can put the notes in the evaluation sheet in the little drop down that says, this is where you find the answer for this. And this was just the only way I could formulate this in my head. So it's mostly notes, and just so you guys as the committee can see all of how they score, what the value points are, which are in blue, and then what question and where it matches up with the application.
And so this would be something that wouldn't necessarily be any kind of qualitative change to the document, but it would be an addition for us to help drive the reviewers so that they're not scrambling through an entire application. They could hover over something on the score sheet and see exactly where this is in the application, and then toggle to that and read it and then put their score in.
Right. And then also this is a chance are we not asking a question that's important? I mean, you can see in the scoring sheet what we have, and are we missing anything?
Well, and that would be the question for Joyce or Brett, even Corey, for that matter, or anybody who's here. I can see everybody for the moment. Thank you, Deborah, for sending us chat messages. They only get flashed to me because I'm not online, but that's helpful too. Is there any scoring item that we are missing? Anybody? If we're good to go with the rest of this as is and stay with our 100 points, certainly Brad, this year, I mean, if there are some other things that the scorers think we should add, or, you know, just change out our system altogether, I think that whether it's the three of us that continue or somebody new next year, we're open to that. And also, if what I was gathering from what Joyce was saying was that the staff, to me, with a couple of exceptions, the flow of the application for the person filling it out has been pretty smooth and kind of has made sense. But if there's some reordering that you all think you need to do, work with Corey on that, probably be okay. Then in terms of making recommendations, Brad, you talked to us a little bit prior about the fact that when the United Way, in your process, the scoring gets done, but the final recommendations are not totally based on scoring. Also, we have had a very hard and fast mathematical way to figure out what the actual recommendations should be. This is the time when we need to look at that. Do you have some suggestions for us before we talk about it as a committee?
No, I think that the process we use is similar, but can't necessarily be adapted to this process. But I think the continued conversations related to the pieces we've talked about today, to continue to work with applying agencies and training related to various pieces that we have talked about to make the process smoother, I think will help. And I think potentially bringing programs together in a future meeting is part of what we're wanting to do at United Way to talk about outcomes and community outcomes, at least just from our perspective, may end up helping strengthen applications here and helping programs be able to work together. So no, I don't think there are any recommendations for us on the larger process. It's a strong process.
Okay. If so, what about we had some tentative agreement about on the priorities sheet regarding minimum grants, maximum grants. The priority sheet this year, and I think the year before, had a, you know, once you had the scores, it laid out exactly that you had to use the scores and divide up the money till it was gone. You didn't ever adjust to get another agency funded. You didn't have any flexibility to spread dollars any differently than the percents on their scores. Do we want to talk about that?
Chair, so are we looking at the City of Topeka social service funding priorities year 2021/2022 where it says social service grant detail? Minimum grant amount 10,000, maximum grant amount 25,000.
Yeah, which we had already been through, but then at the bottom there's a paragraph that.
Okay, the city will accept applications for new programs? Is that what you're looking at?
Actually, yes, and now that you read that, because we really hadn't addressed it, if we're not accepting applications for new programs, that whole first line would go away, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but then, so start reading on the second line.
So then you go into applications will be scored, and the percentage of their score multiplied by the amount requested will be the total funding allocation. For example, request for 25,000 and they get a 95%, the agency would receive 23,750. Once the threshold is met, the funding will be cut off based on ranking.
That's what's been done the last few years. So if we run out of, if it's an absolute percentage, we run out of money, you don't get funded. And it would also, if we're not going to go under 10, we could have some money left over. We, for instance, looking at the way the dollars fell this year.
And what's your thought, Chair?
I've never been comfortable with it, but I don't know anything better. Especially if there's no subjective element to the decision-making process. And we've given this committee, in the application packet, I believe that the committee has the chance to override anything they want, but has not taken that privilege. But that the process itself, once the scoring is done, the scoring has been it. Deborah's asking, wouldn't it mean that the cutoff would be lower? I think, Deb Dawkins, the issue is that if we had, I want to say, what was it, 5 or 7 grants that came in under 10,000 this year, they would not have been funded with the 10,000 minimum grant. We would have simply ended up, and because of the formula for how you figure out somebody's allocations, we would have simply had that money left over. The reviewers would have had to have that money left over and delivered the recommendations to the committee with everything 10,000 or higher, and then the committee would then, if I'm thinking it through right, would then be able to decide what to do with that remainder money, what to recommend to the council to do. Which is okay. I mean, it takes it out of the hands of the reviewers, but then the committee would just have to decide. And that was just some of the communication that needed to happen between the city and our vendor so that they realized that and didn't send them forward under 10,000 if that was what our rule was.
And so we made that the rule, right? Don't we, 10,000 not to go under. Didn't I say that last time?
We did do that. I mean, we haven't voted on any of it for exactly the reason of what we're doing now. Each of these things loop back on one another, and I didn't see any point in voting through any of the forms till we've been through all the different variables. So we could change our mind on that too, but the 10,000 minimum was there, as we discussed before, just for the cost effectiveness of the granting.
Madam Chair.
Yes, please.
Now, the conversation with regards to the minimum of 10,000, it's my understanding that previous committee members set that up as kind of a guideline for helping, because the thinking then was that if it was for less than 10,000, then it may be there were other resources to assist those applications, and we needed to focus on those that were at a minimum of 10,000 and put the work effort into that. Am I correct or incorrect?
I'm sorry, I was reading Deborah's written note, so I need to, if I could ask you to repeat that.
Deborah, quit sending stuff to her when I'm trying to talk, okay?
She can't do two things at once.
I'm just want to make clear, I think that it was previous council members that had set that 10,000 minimum because they felt that the work effort that was put into looking at these applications and moving forward, that if the program was less than 10,000, then it maybe wasn't the most efficient use of the work effort to look at these applicants, so that maybe the ones that were lower than 10,000 could find other resources rather than going through this process. Is that accurate, or?
I think it was more the reporting, the grant management after the grant was awarded. I mean, anybody can apply, but if I recall correctly, Corey could plug in or whoever, but I think it had to do with the grant management, the reporting and, you know, gathering the data and reporting in.
Councilmember, Chair.
Yes.
Yes, you were correct. It was the grant management. We were open to that, but the committee's desire a few committees ago was to go ahead and set it at 10. So it's been there for a little while. But yes, one of the things that we made that 10 at was for the reporting and the financial reporting and issuing contracts. And we just thought 10 was a standard amount that we wanted to stay at.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so Chair, what we're looking at is whether to keep that whole paragraph.
Well, we need some sort of guidance, yes, and we put it there so that it was out to the applicants as well, and that everybody knew. I mean, the disconnect that we found that our vendor didn't understand the first time this year was stating the minimum application amount at 10,000 versus the minimum grant amount at 10,000. So we had needed to sync that up. And what we did, the way it's sitting right now, is that the minimum grant amount would be
$10,000.
I mean, if there were money left, it would allow the committee, I suppose, to go back and proportionally, or however they want it, give additional funds to those agencies that had qualified and come in over the 10,000 amount. Or I guess there's a chance that, well, no, if we hadn't run out of money. There wouldn't be any leftovers if we made a lot of big grants.
So what's your suggestion, Chair? Is it that it stay as it is, even though you don't like it?
I don't know. I mean, we can go one way or another. We can either take out the wording is okay. Where we run into trouble is the 10,000 minimum grant, possibly.
Chair,
Yes.
just in our conversations, just as we were thinking about this, I think it hinges on whether or not it is a $10,000 minimum grant request or $10,000 minimum grant award.
Correct.
And so theoretically, a program that applied for $10,000 would need a 100% score in order to be awarded. Potentially what this does is if it is a $10,000 minimum grant award, it forces programs to potentially ask for more money than they would potentially need in order to try to reach a threshold where they would be funded, is one way to think about this. I don't know if that's helpful or not.
Well, that's a really good point. And the idea with the, I guess I'm thinking back to when I was involved in those conversations, would have been, let's make it worth their while. And we don't want really small programs. You know, they can, for this, the intent of this being for renewable core program funding for established programs, that it needed to be meaty enough to make it worth everybody's time to apply and to manage the grant. People could reconsider that, but yeah. But you're making a good point. If the minimum grant amount was 10,000 and that was a hard number, then people that really only needed 10,000 might apply for 12 just to make sure they got funded at all. Is that what I'm hearing? Good point. What was our low grant? Maybe they trickled down to about an 8,000 grant this year.
That's correct. I would, again, I don't want to push a conversation longer than it needs to, but I would be interested to hear from programs if, again, in a conversation like this, of whether or not the requirements are, whether or not they actually find value on their end in a grant that's fewer than $10,000.
Asking folks that are always asking for money? Okay.
Or would they say, actually, the requirements on the grant are too much for an $8,000 piece, but we accepted it because we wanted to be a city grant partner?
All right, any comments from the agencies? Don't see any.
This is Barbara with the Topeka Center for Peace and Justice. We were one of the 8,800 recipients. Having that kind of money for a very strong program is our first year and allows us to become a partner with this process. Without it, we would have been still at the square one as we were learning how to put this application together, even though, it's our first year. So it's very beneficial to us that you consider allocating your funds until they're gone, even if it does go under, to allow programs like ours to become a part of this process.
Thank you. Others? I think we have to fix it going into this. So the issue would be minimum, as Brett phrased it, minimum grant request amount, $10,000, or minimum grant, $10,000.
Tell me the two again. I think I'm just thinking.
Well, if we want to keep using the $10,000 figure, the choice would be, do we want to say a minimum grant request amount of $10,000, which means that if on your percentage, your allocation, and if there's still money available, you'd get 89.75. You'd still get something if you scored well and there was money. But that if you said minimum grant amount, you'd have to have a perfect score to get funded if you applied for $10,000.
Which might make them up the application amount.
I make them up the application or knock out folks that in good faith thought they were going to get some money. By a minimum request, I'm not sure we've ever gone, oh, Corey might remember, but typically it doesn't wind down to much less than in the 7,000 range. I'm not quite sure, Deborah, what you mean by the amount of work required for $10,000 does not make less than 10,000. Are you saying, Deborah, that a grant of less than 10,000 would be okay? Or that we should have a 10,000 grant minimum?
So again, a minimum request of 10,000, I don't know why it's so hard for me to wrap my mind around this. Minimum request for 10,000 if we left it at that. And then if they didn't meet 100%, then if there was money left over after all the other agencies that met it, then they might get some funding.
Correct.
So at first I had said, I think in previous meetings, just keep it at the 10,000 rather than going below. And now as I think about if there's money left in the pool and that not going out, I definitely don't think money should go out just to go out. However, if we know that they were marked down just a handful of points and everything else was meeting the level that they needed to be at. This is not a perfect system by any means. I would agree. I think I'm reversing my decision then
Well, Deb,
initially.
Deb is saying that, is clarifying that her comment was that we should keep the minimum award amount, and Tawny is agreeing. So, it has to do with the cost effectiveness of the award.
And I disagree.
Okay.
Where are you at on this, Mike?
Sure, I just unmuted. You know, the explanation that Brett gave between request and award, I know that for me, and I don't want to offend anybody, I don't want to word our process so that it encourages people to apply for more than they really need just so that they can hope to get something. I would rather that we not have any left over. I mean, because it all should go for a purpose. And I agree with Christina. I think that for me anyway, I think that the request stays, and then if there's something left, you know, if we have funds that are left over, then we could give an award that's left in less than 10,000 and not make it so definite that it has to be 10,000 at a very minimum. I see some head shaking, but you know, it's just for me. It just I just want to make sure that it's not just for efficiency's sake. It's for the effort to try and put the money to best use. So I think the request is there. If it meets everything, then we consider it. If it doesn't, then it gets put on a lower level of priority. And if we do, in fact, have funds that were then left over, then we can reconsider that request at a lower level of the funds that we have available. When you talk about it, quite honestly, after a while it gets a little fuzzy. And I'm sure for the organizations it's clear as a bell, but I've never, I know it was explained to me, but I've never really, I guess, felt comfortable with a $10,000 minimum award. As it was explained to me kind of bluntly, if it's not worth $10,000, it's not worth us looking at it. I didn't really like that explanation, so I'm with the $10,000 request, but not making it a minimum of $10,000 award. And of course, that's just our recommendation. There might be the governing body as a whole may decide completely differently on this.
I agree, Mike.
They appreciate that we're spending all this time picking it apart, doing the best we can to come up with a recommendation. But well, we had some votes from the audience about keeping the 10,000 minimum, and simply one option, of course, is if there's money left over, it can be reapplied back up the line to the agencies that are there, or could be used for another purpose. What I'm hearing, though, is that at this point, Councilman Padilla and Councilwoman Valdivia Alcala are leaning toward making it just a 10,000 minimum request amount. That still pushes up the goal of the size of the program that people had at some point. All right, well, I'm going to pencil that, since that's 2 out of 3 of us, and I think that's reasonable as well. So minimum grant request amount in our consensus. We're right at noon. We're going to be seeing some minor amendments coming back. We've still got a handful of items to clarify. Items that have come up that I see are that are still hanging are, I don't know if this was discussed, but would we consider a cap per agency? We do have agencies with multiple programs. Do we want to consider that? We have debated but not decided about the issue of the 2 grandfathered agencies. And there was an issue of regarding the calendar of the actual application cycle, and it got stubbed in here to repeat what we did in 2021 or in 2020, but needed to throw that back open to United Way about, or any others in terms of the cycle. Do you want to spend time on that today, or do we want to meet one more time with these final documents and go?
Chair, unfortunately, I have other Zoom meetings.
Today, okay.
Same here, Chair.
Well,
I'm on a schedule as well. I planned it for us to be done by noon. I have to come back.
I've got a 1 o'clock coming in myself. All right, let's, staff knows what we've got in terms of the changes that we stubbed today. We should be able to get those out. Do you want to try and meet within the next, we've got till the end of December. We just want to wrap this up in plenty of time and get it to the council. Thoughts from the committee members on our wrap-up meeting?
Mondays are my best, and I'm open to this time up until the end of the year.
Okay. And you're open on any Mondays from 10 to 12? Councilman Padilla, any conflicts, or is that good?
Mondays are good, except for the 7th. That one I have one that would be in conflict this time.
Okay. Well, we will get something scheduled, get those final, hopefully I didn't forget anything, but we'll try and get those down and knock out the final decisions. Anything else to wrap up? Council members, Brett?
I just want to thank everybody. I mean, we have, what, 25, 26, 27 participants. I think this is good to have that many people talking about this, and appreciate all the input, especially from Deborah.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And if we've stubbed our toes or there's some thoughts that you have, get them to Liz and etoin@topeka.org if you don't have that, and she'll get them to us.
Everybody have a blessed Thanksgiving as much as possible during this pandemic. Take care of each other. Mask up.
All right. Thank you. You get notices.
Thank you.